It started with a bulldozer crashing through my prize azaleas at 7:04 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not figuratively. Not metaphorically. A literal bulldozer. Yellow, enormous, and driven by a guy in a neon vest who looked almost as confused as I did when I stepped out of my kitchen with a coffee cup and saw my meticulously hand-laid brick path being scooped up like yesterday's trash. The driver threw up his hands, mouthing something that looked a lot like, "Not my fault," which was confirmed seconds later when Karen herself strutted out from behind the machine, arms crossed, smirking like she'd just won a game of HOA Monopoly. Let me back up. I live in a semi-rural HOA community with just enough rules to keep the lawns mowed and the mailboxes matching, but not enough to stop someone like Karen from rising through the HOA ranks like a mildew bloom after a rainstorm. She had power. She had opinions. And she had absolutely no respect for the easement behind my property line, something she suddenly decided was hers by community right. Her words, not mine. That easement was a sliver of land technically co-owned by the HOA but left unused for decades. I'd turned it into a garden path, which connected my property to the Greenbelt Trail system. I landscaped it myself, planted it with native flora, and even installed a little wooden archway with solar light. It was beautiful. And now it was mulch. When I asked her what in God's name she thought she was doing, Karen just gestured to a crumpled paper in her hand and said, "It's being cleared for fire safety." Voted and approved. I asked, by who? She said, the HOA board. I said, "You mean you and your sister?" Because yes, Karen's sister Cheryl was the HOA secretary, and the rest of the board had either moved or resigned after last year's driveway paver color debacle. That left Karen in full control. The bulldozer roared to life again while she strutted back to her golf cart and chirped, "Don't worry, sweetie, you can replant after we finish widening the road." Widening? What road? There was no road, just my path, my work, my peace. I stood there as years of labor were torn out and scooped into the bed of a dump truck. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just walked back inside, poured out my now cold coffee, and opened my laptop. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to research. And I was going to out-Karen the Karen. First stop, the County Land Registry. Then the HOA Charter. Then a series of late-night emails to 3 different agencies: Roads and Infrastructure, Environmental Management, and Historical Preservation. I learned 2 things by dawn the next day. 1. Karen had technically violated several local ordinances by modifying an undeveloped easement without formal county approval, and 2. My property shared a forgotten access point to a decommissioned county roadway, one that had been left to nature decades ago but was still legally designated as public utility right-of-way. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in leverage. That week, I let Karen think she'd won. She waved from her porch, smug and oblivious. I even gave her a thumbs up when I saw her taking selfies in her now-cleared, future fire lane. Meanwhile, I scheduled a meeting with the county's Department of Transportation. I pitched them a civic project: reopening the neglected access road for community benefit, adding a paved path for emergency services and public walking access. I attached photos of Karen's new dirt trail and highlighted the fact that the HOA had illegally disturbed native vegetation. That got their attention. When a clipboard-carrying man from the county showed up on Karen's lawn 3 days later, she thought it was to congratulate her. He was there to inspect and document her bulldozing spree. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee this time with a smile. Karen argued. She gestured wildly. At one point, she grabbed her phone and called her sister, who marched out of her house 10 minutes later in her bathrobe like she was going to slap the permit out of someone's hand. But permits weren't the issue. Liability was. By the next week, the county issued a temporary stop order on any modifications to easements or shared access paths in our HOA. Karen stormed to my door with a copy of the order, waving it like it was my fault she bulldozed without checking first. "You think you're clever?" she sneered. "You think you can win this?" I just pointed to the part that said, "Pending full review," and said, "No, but I think I can wait." Because I could. Because Karen didn't know that the county review would uncover something better than a victory. It would uncover an opportunity. Turns out, the old public access road wasn't just a dusty line on a forgotten map. It had zoning potential. Specifically, it could be reactivated by public petition and infrastructure funding if a case was made for increased walkability, fire access, or utility improvement. And guess whose land it cut directly through once you reconnected it? Karen's entire side yard. But I didn't rush. I gathered signatures. I got a local historian to write a blurb about the road's heritage value. I even contacted a non-profit that specialized in green corridors and trail connectivity. They loved the idea. I let them take over the application and PR campaign, and they did what they do best. Made it civic, noble, unavoidable. When the proposal hit the local paper with a headline that read, "Historic Public Trail may be reopened through suburban neighborhood," Karen lost her mind. She showed up to the next county planning session in heels and pearls, ranting about privacy and property values. She tried to claim she invested in beautifying the area, only to have photos of her bulldozer spree shown on a projector screen. She glared at me across the room. I waved. Calm, smug, patient. After the hearing, she cornered me outside the building. "You're ruining my life," she spat. "You want a war?" I sipped my coffee and replied, "No. I want a path. Same as you did. Only mine goes somewhere." That's when I knew the tide had turned. Because she didn't scream. She just stood there, frozen, realizing the trap she'd walked into. And when the county gave conditional approval for the project, pending public easement confirmation, Karen's mailbox was flooded with letters. Some in favor, some objecting, but all legal. All requiring response. All dragging her into bureaucracy she could no longer control. She tried to rally the HOA, but it was too late. Her iron grip had annoyed too many people. And the best part? I wasn't even on the board. I was just a guy who once planted flowers and now had blueprints for a county-maintained pedestrian trail, running right through the lawn of the woman who bulldozed mine. Karen didn't go down easy. The day after the county granted conditional approval for the trail project, she launched her counterattack. Flyers appeared in every mailbox overnight. Cheaply printed, riddled with typos, and titled, "Say No to Public Traffic in Our Private Community." It was peak Karen. Dramatic capitalization, bad grammar, and an air of frantic desperation. The flyer accused me, without naming me directly, of trying to turn our peaceful neighborhood into a government-run walking zoo, and implied that the trail would bring in crime, trash, and outsiders. I especially liked the part where she claimed the trail would lower property values, though she neglected to mention she was the one who had literally driven a bulldozer through native landscaping without permits. Pot, meet, kettle. I didn't respond. Not publicly, anyway. While Karen shouted on doorsteps and chased joggers off sidewalks, I kept my head down and stayed cordial. I helped old Mr. Leonard reseed his lawn. I dropped off a case of lemonade at the neighborhood park cleanup. I was playing the long game, and the more unhinged Karen looked, the better my odds got. She tried to turn the next HOA meeting into a witch hunt, claiming the county had been misled and that some resident had launched a personal vendetta. But when she banged her gavel and asked for a motion to halt all non-essential land projects, she was met with silence. Her sister Cheryl tried to save her with a second, but the other 3 board members, finally shamed into attending, refused to vote in her favor. That was when the cracks really began to show. Karen was no longer a feared tyrant. She was a cautionary tale in real time. Parents didn't want their kids near her yard. Dog walkers crossed the street. Even Cheryl started leaving meetings early. And the kicker? I still hadn't spoken a single hostile word in public. I let her self-destruct under the weight of her own ego. The real gem came in the form of a letter from the county a week later. They were scheduling a field inspection to map out the reactivation of the public access path. They would need access to all bordering properties, which included mine and Karen's. The inspection wasn't optional. Karen would either have to grant access or attempt to deny it, which would result in a formal notice of obstruction and, potentially, fines. She tried to bar them anyway. She actually called the sheriff to report the county workers as trespassers. The deputy showed up, listened politely, then pointed out that it was she who could be fined for impeding municipal operations. Karen turned a shade of red usually reserved for ripe tomatoes and Christmas tree ornaments. When the field team arrived, I brought them bottled water and a binder with neatly labeled tabs showing historical maps, HOA guidelines, and aerial photos of the old access route. Karen stood at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, glaring so hard I thought she might explode. She tried to argue that their survey equipment was damaging her grass, which was ironic considering she'd annihilated half my garden with a literal caterpillar. The county rep calmly noted her complaint and moved on. I gave a small wave. She responded by slamming her door so hard it rattled her wind chimes. Now, here's where things got fun. In my research, I'd discovered that if a public right-of-way hadn't been formally vacated, and if access was impeded, the county had the right to reclaim it using eminent domain, especially if it was supported by community benefit. Karen's side yard, the one she used for her precious koi pond and monthly wine-tasting circle, sat directly over the old roadbed. She'd built over it illegally years ago, without permits, assuming it would never matter. But now it mattered a lot. I submitted a supplemental report to the county, detailing her koi pond construction, including drone photos showing its layout relative to the old road. I didn't say she should lose it. I just asked whether her unpermitted additions could complicate access. Bureaucracy did the rest. Within days, Karen received a request for clarification regarding her modifications and their compliance with local land use ordinances. I'm fairly certain she screamed. She marched to my door the next morning, jabbing her finger at my chest like she was about to perform an exorcism. "You're sick," she hissed. "You're obsessed with destroying me." I calmly took a sip of my coffee, leaned against the doorframe, and replied, "You destroyed a garden path. The county's fixing a road. I'm just enjoying the view." She stammered, possibly looking for a comeback, then spun around so fast her oversized sunglasses nearly flew off. Of course, this was personal for her. Karen's yard wasn't just grass and landscaping, it was her little kingdom. The pond, the pergola, the hedge maze she never maintained, all of it was part of her image, her brand. She saw the public road project not as an inconvenience but as an existential threat. So she did what Karens do best, escalate. She hired a lawyer. A real one, with a business card and everything. And to be fair, he did his job. He filed a temporary injunction against the county's project, citing irreparable harm and community disruption. The judge, unfortunately, granted a short stay to review the case. For about 2 weeks everything paused. Karen celebrated by throwing a block party. She didn't call it that, of course, she called it a community resilience barbecue. But it was clearly a victory lap. She put up banners, handed out invitations with my name suspiciously missing from the list, and even ordered a bounce house, which she parked right over the corner of the disputed path. I didn't go, but I watched, and I waited, because what Karen didn't know was that during the pause, the county opened the matter for public comment. And I had receipts, photos, statements. HOA residents who were tired of Karen's antics wrote letters of support. Parents who wanted safer walkways for their kids signed petitions. Even Mr. Leonard, a Korean War vet who rarely left his recliner, submitted a handwritten note that simply read, "The path was nice. Bring it back." The public momentum was undeniable. When the injunction hearing came, Karen brought her lawyer, a folder stuffed with papers, and a glossy portfolio titled, "Preserving Our Neighborhood." I brought a USB stick and a smile. The judge was concise. After reviewing the original land registry, the unpermitted modifications, and the public interest documentation, he lifted the injunction. The project could proceed, with one caveat. Any personal property obstructing the right-of-way had to be removed voluntarily within 30 days, or the county would do it themselves. Karen's scream was audible even from the courthouse hallway. The fallout was swift. Within a week, survey markers were placed on her lawn. She tried to protest again, this time to the mayor's office, but they deferred to county jurisdiction. She tried to host a Save the Koi rally, but only Cheryl showed up, and she brought wine, not signs. Her pond was drained, her pergola dismantled, and her hedge maze trimmed down by public works crews with zero sympathy. But the best part? It wasn't over yet. Because the county had one final surprise, they wanted to pave the path. Fully. With lights, signage, and a designated bike lane. And they wanted to name it after someone, preferably a local resident who had advocated for community connection and historic preservation. Guess who they picked? When I got the email from the county commissioner's office asking for permission to name the trail after me, I honestly thought it was a prank. A cruelly sophisticated prank, perhaps orchestrated by someone with a twisted sense of humor and an encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhood politics. But no, it was real. They had chosen to honor me as the citizen advocate responsible for bringing the trail back to life. I reread the email twice, then once more, letting the surreal weight of it sink in. Karen had bulldozed my garden. Now she would be watching as my name was etched into a bronze trailhead plaque, directly in front of her Koi-less yard. But I wasn't going to accept it right away. Not publicly. I'd learned by now that silence, when timed correctly, was more powerful than any speech. So I let the news leak naturally. A quiet word to the historian who had helped with the preservation report. A casual mention at the community dog park. Within days, the rumor mill had cranked into overdrive. Karen, already under siege by contractors marking her lawn with fluorescent spray paint, nearly combusted when she caught wind of it. She stormed into the next HOA meeting 10 minutes early, clutching a binder labeled Trailgate, the true story. She accused me of orchestrating a public smear campaign, of colluding with the county, and, my personal favorite, of running a covert political operation aimed at dismantling suburban values. I sat in the back, sipping an iced tea and letting her unravel. By the time she started demanding that the trail be renamed Community Way to reflect a nonpartisan neighborhood identity, even Cheryl looked like she was considering a transfer to another zip code. Karen didn't stop at meetings. She took to social media. She started a Facebook group titled Stop the Trail Takeover, which featured grainy photos of me walking my dog, overlaid with captions like, "Would you trust this man with your property values?" Her posts were so wildly conspiratorial that a few people actually joined just for entertainment. Someone uploaded a meme of Karen with her bulldozer edited to look like Godzilla flattening flower bed. It went mildly viral. That's when she started blocking people, including her own niece, who commented, "Chill, Auntie. It's just a path." The county, meanwhile, continued moving forward. Contractors began prepping the site. Survey crews returned. And one morning, I stepped out to find a freshly installed sign at the base of the easement. Future site of the Howard Trail, a community heritage project. My full name in bold letters. The sign was temporary, printed on a weatherproof board and hammered into the ground, but the effect was seismic. Karen stood in her bay window, slack-jawed, gripping a mug like she was about to throw it. I gave her a little wave and went back inside. Then came the true escalation. 2 nights later, someone defaced the trail sign. They didn't just knock it down, they spray-painted over my name in red and wrote, "Liar," in all caps. Then they poured used motor oil over the base and scattered fake crime scene tape around it. It was amateurish but unmistakably targeted. I didn't even have to guess who was responsible. The next morning, Karen was outside watering her lawn with the most performative innocence I'd ever seen, wearing an "I support neighborhood values" t-shirt that looked freshly ironed. I didn't confront her. I called the county's Parks and Rec department and filed a vandalism report. They came out the same day, photographed the damage, and, without a word, installed a new sign. This one was double the size, mounted higher, and featured an official county seal. It gleamed in the sunlight. Karen didn't come out of her house for 3 days. Then the legal letter arrived. Not for me, for her. A county attorney had reviewed the vandalism complaint and, in conjunction with her prior obstruction, issued a formal warning. Any further interference with the trail project could result in misdemeanor charges. Karen, who'd spent the last few weeks acting like a one-woman neighborhood militia, was now one misstep away from having a criminal record. Cheryl, at this point, had gone full ostrich and was pretending she'd never supported any of this. She even skipped the next HOA meeting, which was the first time I'd seen Karen show up without a backup ego. But Karen didn't know how to stop. That's the thing with people like her. They don't lose gracefully. They implode in slow motion. So when her petty sabotage failed, she pivoted to litigation. That's right, she filed a civil suit against the county, against the HOA, and against me personally. Her claim? That the trail violated her peaceful enjoyment of property, that the project caused emotional distress, and that I had engaged in a campaign of targeted harassment. The lawsuit read like a Mad Libs of suburban paranoia. She even accused me of weaponizing environmentalism. I had to admire the creativity. The county laughed it off. Their legal team filed a motion to dismiss before the ink was dry. But for me, it meant hiring a lawyer. And while I wasn't worried about the outcome, I was tired. Tired of the pettiness. Tired of the drama. I wasn't playing the long game anymore. I was just living in it. So I went to the final mediation hearing determined to end it, not with a counterattack, but with something Karen couldn't process: magnanimity. When the mediator asked if I had a response to her claims, I said yes. I opened my file, pulled out a settlement offer, and slid it across the table. Karen leaned in suspiciously, expecting a demand for money or retraction. But all it said was, "I agree not to pursue any damages from past or future defamation related to the trail project, provided that Ms. Karen Winters agrees to a written public statement of withdrawal and non-interference." Karen blinked, then blinked again. "That's it?" she asked. I nodded. "That's it. I don't need an apology. I just need you to stop." For the first time in our long, ridiculous war, she didn't yell. She just sat there, quiet. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was ego collapse. Or maybe, just maybe, she realized she'd already lost everything she cared about, and this was the last off-ramp. She signed it. The next week, she posted a statement to the HOA's newsletter. It was as sterile and begrudging as humanly possible, but it did the job. She acknowledged the legality of the trail project and pledged to disengage from further efforts to oppose its development. No apology. No reflection. But it was public. It was over. Construction resumed. Concrete was poured. The county added benches, solar lights, and even a little informational plaque about the history of the old roadbed. They asked if I wanted to write something personal for the dedication. I said no. Let the path speak for itself. Opening day was surreal. Families came out with kids on scooters. An elderly couple took a slow, deliberate walk hand in hand. Cyclists zipped through politely. People took selfies with the trail marker. And standing at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, was Karen. No clipboard. No flyers. Just her. Watching. I caught her eye. She didn't scowl. She didn't glare. She just nodded, barely, and walked back into her house. I couldn't say if it was resignation or some deeply buried flicker of respect. But for the first time in months, the neighborhood was quiet. The air felt lighter. And the path, the one she tried so hard to destroy, was alive with movement, connection, and purpose. The thing about power is it's loud when you're chasing it and dead silent when you lose it. After Karen's lawsuit fizzled and the trail was officially opened, she all but vanished. The woman who once treated HOA meetings like Supreme Court hearings and emailed daily complaints about unsanctioned daffodils had gone dark. Cheryl quit the board entirely, citing stress and spiritual fatigue, which I'm pretty sure translates to, I'm tired of being publicly humiliated by association. Karen stopped attending meetings, stopped waving from her porch, and stopped harassing teenagers about rollerblades. It was almost eerie. But as much as I enjoyed the peace, I didn't trust it. Because people like Karen don't stop. They simmer. I wasn't wrong. It started subtly, tiny, low-stakes sabotage that could easily be passed off as coincidence. A trail light mysteriously flickered out, even though it had been inspected a week prior. A signpost was found leaning at a suspicious angle, its bolts mysteriously missing. A stretch of landscaping near her property line was dug up in the night, leaving the newly planted shrubs wilted and exposed. I filed the usual reports. The county came out, took notes, repaired the damage. But the cycle repeated. Every fix was met with another act of petty destruction. Not enough to press charges. Just enough to harass. I installed a discreet trail camera on a tree facing the stretch closest to her yard. Nothing illegal about it. It was public property, after all. And after 3 uneventful nights, bingo. There she was. Karen, in a dark hoodie and mismatched garden gloves, sneaking into the trail edge at 2:13 a.m. with a wrench and a small pry bar. The footage wasn't exactly Netflix-worthy, but it was more than enough to get the county's attention. They issued a formal warning again. She responded with a rambling email about vigilante gardening and defending suburban aesthetics. It was almost impressive how much nonsense she could fit into a paragraph. The county could have pressed charges. I told them not to. Not yet. I had a better idea. 2 weeks later, I filed a request to expand the trail project with a new phase. A community connectivity extension that would wind behind several more properties, including a long-unused pedestrian access path that just happened to run along the back of Karen's house. I included letters of support from neighboring homeowners and a proposal for public art installations. Painted benches, little lending libraries, even a mosaic tribute wall. The response was enthusiastic. Funding was available. And the county loved the idea of expanding civic engagement. Karen, meanwhile, didn't know what was coming. Not until the new survey markers popped up one morning like mushrooms after rain. She marched over to my driveway, fists clenched, face tight with fury. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" she said. "Is this how you get your kicks? Ruining people's privacy." I looked up from raking leaves and said, "You said it yourself. I'm obsessed. Might as well lean in." She actually sputtered. Like literal sputtering. Then she stormed off with a scream muffled into her windbreaker collar. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Word had spread about the trail expansion, and most people were thrilled. Families saw it as a win for safety. Older residents liked the idea of shorter, shaded routes. The only voice of dissent, of course, was Karen, who, after months of silence, rose like Dracula from a coffin to deliver a speech dripping with bitterness and passive aggression. She called the trail a creeping invasion of concrete socialism, and claimed it would erode the moral fabric of the neighborhood. I thought the guy behind me was going to choke trying not to laugh. But here's the twist she didn't see coming. The expansion wasn't just popular, it was entirely legal. The pedestrian easements had been recorded decades ago but never developed. Karen had been using the space for personal storage and landscaping for years, assuming no one would ever touch it. She'd fenced off part of it, even built a little gazebo that partially encroached. I presented the county with photographic proof and records showing the land was meant for public right-of-way. The county responded with a notice. Remove the structures within 30 days or face removal fees. Karen did what Karen always does when cornered. She retaliated. She sent a series of furious emails to local news stations claiming she was the victim of neighbor harassment via zoning loopholes. Most ignored her. One ran a short clip, but it backfired spectacularly. They included a shot of the trail and interviews with local kids who said things like, "I love the path," and "My grandma walks here now." The segment ended with a cheerful note about community improvement. Karen looked like a grumpy extra from a satire. Then came the final straw. During the annual neighborhood fall festival, a surprisingly wholesome event with cider booths and pumpkin painting, Karen set up a folding table just outside the main entrance. She wasn't a vendor. She wasn't invited. But there she was, handing out photocopied flyers accusing me of trail tyranny and comparing the public path to East German surveillance infrastructure. She wore a sandwich board that said, "Ask me how to save your yard." It would have been funny if it weren't so deeply sad. I walked over, hands in my pockets, and asked, "Having fun?" She snapped, "This isn't over." I smiled. "It's actually very, very over. You just haven't accepted it yet." Then I turned and walked back toward the caramel apple stand. A little girl passed Karen and asked her mom, "Why is that lady wearing a sign?" The mom said, "She's just mad about sidewalks, honey." I laughed so hard I almost dropped my apple. A few days later, a flatbed truck pulled up behind Karen's house. County workers disassembled her gazebo, removed the fence section that encroached, and restored the pedestrian easement to its original alignment. Karen stood on her porch the whole time, arms folded, lips pressed together like she was physically holding in a scream. I waved as the last post came down. The foreman gave me a thumbs up. The work was done. But the true end came quietly. About a week after the final section of the trail was completed and opened to the public, I found something odd at the trailhead sign. It was a note, handwritten, folded under a rock. I opened it and instantly recognized the spiky handwriting. It read, "You win. I'm done. I just wanted to protect what I built. I didn't know how to lose. I still don't. But this war is yours. I'm stepping back." Karen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was an admission. And from Karen, that was about as rare as an honest Facebook neighborhood post. I folded the note, pocketed it, and said nothing. Let her keep her pride. The next time I saw her, she was walking alone at dusk, without flyers, without signs, just quietly strolling down the edge of the new path. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. But I nodded, almost imperceptibly. She didn't return it. She just walked on. Maybe that was the end. Maybe not. But for the first time since she bulldozed my garden, the neighborhood felt still. Not perfect. Not peaceful. But still. And that silence? It sounded a lot like winning. 3 months after the last trail segment opened, something strange happened. People started showing up. People who didn't live in our neighborhood. At first, it was a couple of joggers in athletic gear who clearly weren't from our HOA, based on their lack of conforming mailbox designs and the way they waved cheerfully at everyone. Then came a yoga group, laying down mats on the small grassy rest area near the community notice board. One Saturday, a man set up an easel and began painting the sunset from the new trail overlook, his brush strokes capturing the colors reflected in Karen's now gazebo-less lawn. That was when I realized something I hadn't planned for. I hadn't just built a trail. I'd accidentally built a destination. The county, thrilled by the overwhelmingly positive response to the project, had added our trail to a regional walking app and online map. The Howard Trail was now a 5-star attraction on a local tourism blog. Apparently, our peaceful suburban walking path had become part of a broader county greenbelt vision. They were calling it a model for civic-led restoration, which was flattering until Karen found out. She didn't scream. She didn't storm across my lawn. She did something worse. She hosted a town hall. Not an HOA meeting. A town hall. She printed flyers, rented the community clubhouse, and titled the event, "Protecting Our Neighborhood's Integrity." I attended out of pure curiosity, slipping into the back row with a half-empty bottle of kombucha and a popcorn bag someone had abandoned. Karen took the podium like a politician 3 elections too late and proceeded to warn the crowd of incoming traffic, urban sprawl, and the disintegration of traditional suburban values. But this time, something had shifted. People didn't clap. They didn't nod along. Some frowned. Some actually laughed. And halfway through Karen's speech, an elderly woman named Dolores, who hadn't spoken at a meeting in 5 years, raised her hand and asked, "If you're so worried about the neighborhood changing, why did you bulldoze the garden that made it beautiful in the first place?" The silence that followed could have frozen fire. Karen blinked. She stammered. For the first time, she had no retort, no diversion, no threat of bylaws or citations. She just said, "I was trying to enforce the rules." Dolores replied, "Well, I like the new path. And I like the people on it. Maybe the rules were the problem." The room erupted in soft murmurs. Someone clapped once, then twice. Then others joined in, slowly, until Karen put down the microphone and walked away without finishing. That was the last time she spoke publicly. The next morning, I found her standing quietly on the trail overlook just after sunrise. I approached slowly, unsure if she was going to curse me out or shove me into a shrub. But she didn't even turn around. She just said, "It's not mine anymore, is it?" I said, "It never was. That's kind of the point." We stood in silence, looking out over the neighborhood. "You really made them like you," she said. I shrugged. "No. I just didn't give them a reason to hate me." She chuckled bitterly. "That's worse." She turned, gave me a look that carried equal parts resentment and reluctant admiration, and walked away. No battle. No closure. Just that. A week later, she listed her house. The for sale sign went up quietly, without a dramatic announcement or even one of her infamous open house charades. The listing was phrased diplomatically: motivated seller, charming potential, scenic trail access. I suppose recent battlefield of personal vendettas wouldn't have drawn as much interest. She moved out 2 months later. No goodbye. No ceremony. I saw the moving truck. I watched as the koi pond liner, long dry, was hauled away like a failed experiment. Cheryl helped her pack, both of them wearing sunglasses like suburban celebrities ducking paparazzi. By noon, they were gone. And just like that, the Karen era ended. The house didn't sit vacant for long. A young couple bought it, teachers, I think. Within weeks, they'd planted a new garden where the gazebo used to be. Not a koi pond. Just flowers. Native, colorful, and growing fast. One afternoon I passed by and waved. They waved back. No clipboard. No glares. No HOA warnings nailed to my door. Just neighbors. The trail thrived. We added a small community library box where people could leave books and note. Kids chalked hopscotch lines that were gone with the next rain, only to reappear the day after. A local artist painted a mural on the utility box near the trailhead, bright colors, trees, abstract faces merging into a horizon line. Someone put up a wind chime, and nobody tore it down. One day I found a small wooden bench had been placed along the bend near where Karen's side yard used to extend. No plaque, no fanfare. Just a bench. I sat on it and watched the wind move through the leaves. That's when I realized something important. This story, my story, had started with destruction. A bulldozer tearing through my garden like a tank through a dream. It had been fueled by pettiness, weaponized bureaucracy, and revenge. And yes, there had been moments when I leaned into that darkness, when the satisfaction of winning meant more than the principle behind it. But now, as I watched families, strangers, and neighbors use a space that had once been a battlefield, I saw something better. Something permanent. Not mine. Not hers. Ours. Karen may have bulldozed my path. But in doing so, she gave me the chance to rebuild it bigger, stronger, and far beyond what I ever intended. She tried to shrink the world to fit her control. I widened it so others could walk. And here's the final twist, the part no one expects. I miss her a little. Not the tantrums. Not the sabotage. But the challenge. The ridiculous, exhausting, relentless force that kept me sharp. Like a chess opponent you can't stand but respect for never making it easy. Karen was a hurricane of entitlement and rage, but she made me dig deeper, fight smarter, and choose my values over my ego. She was the villain I didn't want but probably needed. Now that the battle's over, I can admit it. She made me better. But she's gone now. And what's left is something far greater than any feud, a legacy. Not of war, but of change. A reminder that the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's building something so undeniably right that your enemies have no choice but to leave. I walked the full trail that evening, from the original brick path I'd once laid by hand to the new paved extension with solar lights softly glowing in the dusk. Along the way, I passed a woman reading on a bench, 2 teenagers racing scooters, and an old man walking his beagle. No one knew what this path had cost. And that was the beauty of it. They didn't need to.